Hey viewers, this is Boon's Bibles, and I'm doing an update for the kydex cover that I made for my Steyr AUG stock. You can see this is my finished product. I have it all contoured and everything the way that I want it. I went over it in the last video, and I'll go over it again in this one. The reasons I decided to do this kydex cover were, first off, when the AUG ejects brass, it normally ejects brass out at about the 5 o'clock position, so to your right and back. When it ejects brass, it tends to nick and ding up your original stock pretty bad. In fact, if I took off the kydex cover, you'd see a little spot directly underneath this raised portion where it's been chipped at from shooting brass out of it. The other reason I wanted to make this kydex cover was this little guy right here. This is the factory ejection port cover that will come on whichever side, depending on what kind of bolt that you got. If you got a left-handed bolt, it'll come on the right side right here, and if you have a right-handed bolt, it'll be directly on the other side. The problem with this is just a little thin piece of plastic that sits on top, and then to attach it, you have this little brass piece that slides on inside of the actual stock. What ended up happening with me so far is you can see there's a little bit of wear on this brass piece right there on the corner where it was rubbing against my bolt carrier, and it was rubbing the finish off, and my bolt carrier looks kind of bad now, and I'm not real happy about it. But the other reason, the more important reason, is I actually had this brass part fall off into the rifle. And I was lucky it did it on the last round and the bolt held open. And there have been people that had this happen, and your bolt chambered or attempted to chamber another round and took this brass part with it, and it locks up the gun pretty bad. And it's not a real fun thing to have to deal with. So for the last couple months, I've just straight taken this off and I've quit shooting with it on the rifle. So I'm going to start from the beginning with everything I did in order to actually prep for this project. The very first thing I made was this little holding jig right here. I made a little bit of modification to it since the last video. I took these little towers. You can see it's just a little notch cut straight through the center. It's to hold up around the size of the pistol grip. Before, this was about 3 inches higher, about up there. When I went to actually mold the kydex and put it on, the 2x4 came up to about here, and the kydex molded it around the 2x4 instead of around the gun, which it wasn't a huge deal. I ended up being able to cut most of that off anyway and have it still work just fine. But if I decided to do this again and make another one, which I probably will out of .080 kydex, I decided to cut these off. That way I don't have that problem, and I can have these come down around more and have even more of a grip on the rifle. But when I went to make this jig, I made a kind of a grocery list, and this one specifically just for the holding jig. What I used was I cut it to 4 inch by 16 inch of 3/4 inch plywood. You can make it bigger, smaller, depending on what you want to use. And you'll need a 7 or 8 inch piece of 2x4. That's actually a little bit longer than what you will need, but that leaves a little bit of extra to work with. 6 wood screws, a sawzall and a wood blade for it. I used a cordless drill. My sawzall was also cordless. They both ran on batteries. You'll need a bit for drilling pilot holes. I used a 7/64 drill bit, and a Phillips driver for your power drill, and then a tape measure and a marker. So I used my sawzall to cut my plywood to the shape that I wanted it and dimensions that I needed. And believe it or not, I actually used my sawzall to make this little rounded groove and this groove up here. You just kind of have to be a chainsaw artist with your sawzall, and it's kind of a fun time. You'll enjoy doing it. But I cut these. Each of these, this is about 2 inches in height. That little groove fits right here for the rounded part on the back of your stock. Like I said, these little towers are for your pistol grip. I actually cut these a little bit wider than what I needed. I didn't do it intentionally, it's just how it ended up happening. I'm gonna glue or screw some foam in here so that way it actually holds it tight. And this is about 2.5 inches tall now. You make it 3 inches, 4 inches I think is what it was at before. Like I said, I cut it down because this is the height that I want it at now after I've done this project once. And this is just basically a front support for the front of your handguard. What I originally intended to do was have a little clamp that clamped down around the inside of the handguard into here to help keep it from wobbling, but I felt like the towers did a good enough job of that I ended up just not doing that. And as you see, I just put 2 screws into each part of there. What you're going to want to do is after you cut each of these parts, you're going to want to take some sandpaper and round over all the corners and edges and try and get everything off that could maybe poke a hole in the Ziploc bag as much as possible. It doesn't take that long to do. I think I had 120 grit sandpaper and it knocked all the edges off fairly quickly and fairly easily. And this is something, I did this about a day or 2 before I actually heated up the kydex to mold it. For actually molding the kydex, what you're going to need is a 12-inch by 12-inch piece of kydex. You can get it off of Amazon. The .125 thickness is about $10 per square foot. But the .080, you can get 4 sheets of it for the price of just the 1.25. And when I do this again, I think I am going to get 4 of the .080s, and I'm going to make more than just one. That way, if I ran across somebody else who had an AUG that kind of wanted to get rid of these problems, I could have one for them. I use a large Ziploc vacuum bag, 21.5 inches by 33.5 inches. And in fact, I still have it over here. Right here. And then here's a little port that you'll hook your vacuum up to suck all the air out. You also need a heated blanket, the Steyr AUG stock, a vacuum, and an oven. You should probably use a little conventional toaster oven from like Black & Decker or something you can get from Walmart for like 40 or 50 bucks. I used the kitchen oven and I was about 2 seconds away from sleeping on the couch that night. So don't use the kitchen oven. It smells real bad. It took me forever to get the smell out of the house. I had the windows open and candles going, and it stuck around for several hours. So don't use the kitchen oven. The reason you need the heated blanket is actually so you can heat up your AUG stock. A lot of people, when I was doing research, had a heat gun, and they were using a heat gun to actually heat up the part that they were going to mold over. I don't have a heat gun, and I wanted to do this project entirely out of stuff I already had on hand. So I had the heating blanket, so that's what I went with. And then I wrote out instructions for actually heating the .125 thickness kydex. I numbered this out in hours, so 0 hours is basically the start of your timeline. At 0 hours, I wrapped my AUG stock in the heated blanket and I put it on high, and I left it in the blanket for about an hour before I actually even thought about putting my kydex in the oven. My heated blanket has an auto shut off after about 3 hours, so by the time you get to the auto shut off, if your heated blanket has one, you'll probably be on your way to almost done with this project anyway. After an hour of having the stock in the blanket, I took the kydex and I put it in the oven cold. I just put it on a pizza pan with a piece of foil on it and stuck it in the oven cold, and then I preheated it to the lowest setting on my oven, which was 170 degrees Fahrenheit. After that, I didn't want to burn the edges of the .125 kydex. I figured as thick as it would take a little bit longer to heat up than the 20 or 30 minutes that everybody else on YouTube was doing with the .080. So I decided that if I heated it at 1 degree Fahrenheit per minute up to 250 degrees, that would give me a decent heat rate without burning it, and it worked fairly well. So what I would do is I'd just go up to my oven and I'd do it 10 degrees at a time. So I start at 170. After 10 minutes at 170, I went to the oven and I cooked it up 10 degrees to 180, and I'd set around for 10 minutes, and I did that all the way to 250. Technically, I guess I did it all the way up to 260. After I got up to 260, I let it set for a little bit, and then I put it up to 265 for another 10 minutes, and I just kind of let it soak in there. This whole process took me about an hour and a half to heat just the kydex, so your AUG stock will actually be in a heated blanket for almost 2.5 hours. I decided to go with the 265 because it kind of split the difference on the conservative side. Some people were saying 250 is as hot as you need, and some people are saying you need to get to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. The people who are saying you need 250 were saying if you go to 300, you risk the chance of burning your kydex. So I decided to split the difference and go with 265. I figured with the .125 thickness, it would help me get more moldability out of it for heating it up. And if I did it slow, I figured I could get it up a little bit higher and push the limit a little bit more to get a better mold out of it. So after I let it sit at 265 for 10 minutes, I had my AUG prep. It was sitting, my AUG stock was already sitting on my jig. And when I set up my jig, to be able to do this. I took out the receiver, the barrel, and the fire control group, and the butt pad. I pulled everything off of it, so it was just the bare receiver sitting on my holding jig. So if you did this with your barrel and the receiver still in the gun, you would need a larger Ziploc bag because it wouldn't want to mold as well when you start sucking air out, because it would get hung up on all the little places. So I pulled everything out and had just the stock. It shortens it down another 10 inches, and it makes it a lot easier to work with. So I took my bare bone stock, put it on the jig. I had the vacuum standing by plugged in, and I had the Ziploc bag standing by opened up with, you can see this is more or less the front of my jig, and it was tucked just inside of the Ziploc bag, so that way all I would have to do is open up the bag, throw the kydex on the stock, and shove it in, and then turn the vacuum on. Once I did that, I pulled the kydex out. That's exactly what I did, is pull the kydex out, I put it on the stock that was sitting prepped up on the jig, pushed it in the Ziploc bag. Your Ziploc bag should have a little speed zip on it, and I did once across and then once across one more time just to make sure that I got a good seal on it. After I did that, flip on the vacuum, it sucks all of the air out. I didn't even end up having to hold the hose of the vacuum to the Ziploc bag because the suction was good enough that the hose was basically holding itself. So I was able to have two hands to work with, which made it a lot easier. And then what I did while the kydex was in the Ziploc bag is I went around with a spoon to all these little curved edges and tried to smooth it in and press the kydex on us to all the little crevices with the spoon. This little raised portion right here was just from a little piece of metal that I'd taped to the stock, because originally I planned on putting a shell deflector in here, and it was just going to slide in underneath there and bolt on. But it's important to go around here with the spoon, that way you can get a good mold on the inside, more so than the outside actually. That way the kydex stays form fitted to what is actually going to be latched onto the stock. And you can see here that I ended up just taking a large like half circle almost out of this side of the stock for the bolt release. When I put this on, it was all covered, and that bolt release was just a raised little rectangle. But when I cut out the bolt release, you couldn't actually almost work it. You couldn't just raise your hand up and slap it to send the bolt home. So I had to actually cut that much out of it in order to actually keep it functional. So when I do this next time, I'm going to do a little bit more measuring. I'm actually going to pre-cut this out. That way I can have two lines. I think it'd look a little smoother if it came down and up and did a smoother outline basically just around the bolt release. And then up here I actually wanted the kydex to come down farther around the bottom of the stock. That way you could still use sling attachments. I believe the AUG specific sling itself actually clamps on around this neck on the AUG. And I think the way it is right now, these edges might kind of cut into the sling a little bit, or the sling might try and pop the cover off. And if it came down a little bit farther, I think that it would work better with a sling. And maybe we can see it here. You can kind of see how this is raised a little bit still, because my 2x4 that I cut out to hold around the pistol grip was right here. So when the kydex molded, it went down, but it kind of curved and angled out before it went and formed to the rest of the stock. But overall, you can see it did turn out fairly well, and I learned a lot of lessons. The first and foremost probably being, maybe don't use .125 kydex for your very first time doing it, because it is extremely difficult to work with. But after I did get the stock molded on, what I used to actually cut this is a Dremel tool with a little cutting bit. It looks kind of like a drill bit, but the actual drill channels are flared out a little bit. So it works really well to actually cut this. It almost heats up the kydex again, and then kind of just pushes its way through the melted portion. And it does a really nice, quick, clean job for the most part of doing this. It's how I cut out the entire side on the ejection port. I tried using multiple things that do this, including the cutting wheel for a Dremel tool, as well as this little hobby knife. And the little hobby knife worked really well for getting into little tight spaces and doing detailed work. But I found out overall that little cutting bit on the Dremel tool was about the best tool that I had around here to do it. I think if like I said, I'm planning on doing this again, I think I'm going to get a little jigsaw and actually measure out different distances and more or less cut the stock before, or cut the kydex before actually heating it up and placing it on the stock. I think cutting off all that excess will make it easier to maybe put it in my toaster oven this time instead of the actual oven. 12 inch by 12 inch was too big to put in the toaster oven, which is why I used the kitchen oven. But when I do this again, I'm going to cut off most of the excess before I even mold it, and try and mold this in the vacuum bag, basically pre-cut, and just do little touch-ups. Well, that's pretty much all I got for you for today, except for this one last thing, is how I set my scope on there. I haven't seen a whole lot of people try anything like this. This is a burst pepper mount with a Redfield Revolution 2-7. I got the AUG with the short rail because it was the cheapest one to get, and it was just within my budget. So I figured out that if I swap the pepper mount around and throw that Redfield in there, it almost gives your AUG kind of a original look to it. Like the original AUGs had that little 1.5 power or 3 power optic that was actually the mount and the scope itself were all machined as one piece and part of the receiver. But those are way more expensive than just getting a railed version. I believe the long rail isn't even that much more expensive than this one. But this works out very well. The 2-7 with this eye relief, it puts my cheek weld right about here on the other side of the rifle because I shoot it right-handed. Well, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video and learned something for your own project. Have a good one.